So if this thing tries to take me out, you're going to control that camera?
All right, let's go ahead and get started. So this evening, the first part of our class is Chris Murphy, who is an alumni of the program. He actually went through and did the MBA version of the program back several years ago. I guess you graduated in like 2009 in that particular sort of time frame. And so I've asked him to come here and talk. He's been in the classroom a handful of times over the past few years and has talked to the students and gives a great background on kind of how he has gotten involved in different aspects of the real estate industry, but more specifically how he's gotten involved with his own personal investing in real estate. And kind of, it's a great sort of set of experiences that have kind of led him to where he is now. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris.
Thank you. So as Dr. Forgy said, my name is Chris Murphy. I graduated the program in '09, and it sounds like a long time ago now, but I'm coming back today to walk you guys through real estate investing. This was a quote that I liked. I saw somewhere that made sense when you're putting in a lot of hours. This is a little bit more about my current role. I work for Equity One. It's a publicly traded REE. I oversee all their Miami operations and a couple of their sites in Broward. They own a lot of Publix-anchored large shopping centers, and I oversee the largest portion of their portfolio nationwide. In the past, I've done a lot of construction, a lot of leases, a lot of everything related to commercial. But my other background and what I'm really passionate about is investing in real estate. Around the time I started working at Equity One, I also picked up my first property. So today's presentation is going to talk you through how that was done, how it can be duplicated, give you some case studies about things that I've experienced and that have worked for me, and hopefully it encourages you to do something on your own as well. I'm only going to speak for a short amount of time on the getting started portion of this, but I'm going to walk you through some of the initial steps, developing your concept, developing a network, and then working on building your track record. I'm only going to do that briefly. Then I'm going to go into a couple of deal examples related to creating value, seller financing, and then different types of loans and options, things like that. And then we'll work through some alternative funding sources. When you are starting off as a developer, you're purchasing your first or second property, it can be very hard to get traditional financing from a bank. So I'll walk you through some additional ways that you can come up with some of that first capital. And please feel free to interrupt me anywhere if you have questions or anything else. I thought this quote was great because what it really says is that you have nothing to lose. Once you get a little bit of skin in the game and you have a handful of properties, then you're kind of concerned with, oh man, I don't want to get the next property that might damage these ones, or I'm heading in this direction. If I start to head off in this direction, then I'm confusing folks. The nice thing about getting started is that you can do whatever you want with it. Some of the initial steps, and again, I'll just touch on this briefly, but one of the things that I would recommend, this journey for me started about 6.5, 7 years ago, and one of the first easy things you can do is to incorporate early, set up your LLC. You can do it on Sunbiz. It's a 2-page application. The cost is like $125 or so. You pick out the name you want, you send it in, it takes about a week or so. It's a fee paid to the state. When you set up your company, you want to immediately request a tax identification number. This is a social security number for your business. You'll need this if you're going to do a bank loan, taxes, your partnership agreements, anything else that you're going to want to do with your company. The next thing I would do is build a basic website. Some of these early steps are essential because later on if you go to see a bank in year number 2, year number 3, they'll say, how long have you been operating for? They'll say, let me investigate a little bit about you, and having these things already in place gives you better answers to give to them. Next thing I would do is begin learning about different markets. I mean, this is something that you can do right now as you're taking the courses. And then begin looking at properties in these markets. I know that different folks in this class are at different stages of this program, so some of you have probably had the financial courses, maybe some of you haven't. But if have, you can start working on creating your projections for the properties, start putting together your cash flow numbers, your net present values, all those good things. But I would encourage you to start small and take baby steps. Start now, though, I think is really the key. After you take your initial steps, you'll want to work on developing your concept, whether it's retail, industrial, whatever it is. You want to work at something that you know about and that you enjoy. For me, I had worked for several companies that put me in some pretty tough neighborhoods to work in. I ran Northside Shopping Center in Liberty City for a while, which is like 500,000 square feet development in the heart of it. And you'd see some pretty crazy things, but I really, really enjoyed it. And that's something I had a passion for that not a lot of other people wanted to get into. So if you find a niche, you find something that you really like, whether it's high-end housing in Aventura, or whether it's industrial in Opelika, or wherever it is, that's where I would encourage you to head towards. So for me, having that prior experience, working my way into low-income housing wound up being a much easier transition, which takes us to our next step. It's finding an easy access point. So once you've figured out what niche you'd want to be in, I think one of the keys is to try to get in as cheaply as possible, whether it's a foreclosure, whether it's a distressed property, whether it's just a normal property that you can get for a good deal that maybe other folks have overlooked. I think when you're starting out, I know that I made a lot of mistakes early, so I think if you can fail small, that's a lot better than just blowing yourself out of the water from the get-go. And then the last thing is finding something that can be replicated so you can build your track record. We'll talk a little bit further on about building a track record, what it is, how you want to do it. But the key is to find bread and butter deals that cash flow enough that allow you to do that second development, third development, and so forth. After you've developed your concept, you're going to want to work on developing your network. And again, this can all start today. It starts in the program. The program does a great job of teaching you the things that you'll need to know for when you're out working. And some of you are probably out working now. But it teaches you those things, but it also provides you access to a wide range of people, whether it's the professors, whether it's your classmates, when they pair you with a mentor. I think for me, one of the keys in having and I've had a really great mentor these past 6-7 years that I got connected with through the program, is to make sure that when you get paired with your mentor that you put as much into the relationship as they do. You want to ask questions, you want to do all those things, but look for opportunities to help them out. 2 quick stories for you. I had been meeting with my mentor for a while, and he had picked up a large piece of property, and it had a little junky rundown guest house on it with raccoons inside and a leaking roof and the whole thing. But I'd already been renovating property, so I offered to renovate it for him. There was a headache. He didn't care about the place, but he wanted it to be together. I didn't charge him anything for it. I was just happy to be helping because he gives a lot to me. Another example, he builds a lot of buildings, and he wanted to see what Fort Lauderdale was like 50 years ago, get some images so he could compare it to what it's like today after he's done all of his work in the city. He mentioned that in one of our breakfasts, so the next day I went down to the City of Fort Lauderdale archives, spent a morning there going through old photographs, ordering prints, the whole thing, sent him a package next week of everything that I found, and he loved it. But just ways that you can give to them, and whether it's something with their operations, something they need that they're not really talking about, whatever it is, but find a way to make that relationship as valuable as possible. The other thing about being in the program is that it helps you develop a network of industry peers, potential investors, and then potential deal partners. Many of my initial relationships for my business came from the program, and all the people I've listed here are all separate people. After you've started building your network and you've developed your concept, what I would do is start working on building your track record. Track record can be anything. It doesn't have to be your first investment. It can be expanded responsibilities in your current job. It can be maybe a small investment or a series of small investments with incrementally increasing complexity. Something to show people what you're doing, how you're doing it well, what you're doing better than other people. It can be working closely with your mentor to see what operational challenges they have. A lot of the mentors in the program run companies, they run operations organizations. Maybe they need help with something, just as a way for you to pitch in. But I think that one of the keys is having a track record be these three things here. And this is going to come in handy when you talk with banks, you talk with investors, anybody else that you're going to want to do business with. But you're going to want to make sure it's easily explainable and understandable. If you pick a path, go down that path, make it something that you can talk about easily. I think it should be something that's tangible and something that can be demonstrated. I brought my mentor one time past a property that I was renovating, showed him around, doing this with the floors, this here, what I got going on here. Something that you can show people, and it might just be pictures, or it might be a project that you worked on, or a document that you put together, or a pro forma. Something that you can hand to an employer, or hand to a bank and say, this is what I do. And then something that's built gradually over time. This goes back to starting early, so that way it's something that you can continually add to. You can't build a track record in a month, or a week, or 90 days, but something that you start now in the program you can have by the time you're out. Does anybody have any questions so far?
When you're talking about building the track record, I assume you were a professional before you were an investor. Did you use a lot of your professional experience as your, kind of criteria, your background, your basis for when you're out trying to either raise money and?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, absolutely. I find that my day job complements a lot my other job.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Whether it's going through neighborhoods, whether it's knowing the neighborhoods, banks, investors, all of it. There's a lot of crossover.
Is there ever any, I guess you're kind of going after different product types, but is there ever any perceived conflict of interest or something like that where you go to an investor and you say, I'm trying to raise X amount of dollars, and they're like, well, but you're busy all day working at your day job?
Yeah. So I haven't had that issue. I think, where there could be issues is this is not something I talk about a lot when I'm at the day job.
Probably more in the reverse maybe would be the.
Yeah, but I try not to mix the two. I use separate groups of contractors. I use Equity One is much bigger banks. I'm using
Right.
smaller banks. So there's not a whole lot of natural overlap,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm definitely careful to make sure that they stay as separate as possible.
Which are the small banks that you're using these days? Because I'm also trying to get something similar to be done, and not many banks are being very responsive to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely a trick to it, and we'll walk through some of the lending
Okay.
stuff, but I've used Ocean Bank a lot in the past. They've been good commercially, and the reason why I started using them was that a guy named Walter Ojeda went through the program. I was actually in one of the first class I lectured to about 5-6 years ago.
Okay.
I started working with him, and he did my first 4, 5, 6 deals.
Okay.
And if you need a residential bank, you can just hit me up after the program. I can send you one too.
Okay.
But I've worked with credit unions. But once you get past 4 properties, none of the traditional banks want to work with you because they have limits. But there are direct lenders that give you the same interest rate and so forth, but it'll go up to 10 properties, single family. So there's lots of different.
Okay.
But yeah, it takes a lot of rejection before you get to where you want to be. So now that you've formed your LLC, you've developed your concept, you've built your network, and you've started to form your track record, now you're ready to acquire some properties, and we're going to walk through how that's done with a couple of quick case studies. And if you have any questions anywhere through these, just go ahead and interrupt me. So this first study is really about creating value, and I think all of these case studies are really about creating value when you get down to it. I think that's really the fundamental point of this. This was a duplex in Hollywood, Florida. It's just east of 95, just north of Sheridan, a neighborhood called Old Liberia. Had a number of challenges. It was at market for 110 days, had hundreds of thousands of dollars in city liens and fines. It was boarded up, and there were vagrants living at the property. And to this day, with all the properties that I've gone through, hundreds and hundreds, this still stands out as one of the worst. I'll show you some photos in a minute. But there was potential. It was a geographically desirable neighborhood. I knew what type of rents I'd get, and they would be solid rents. It was a solid structure, and it was an older building, which can be problematic, but it also meant that the units were larger. So I get more rent for them. These are some of the nice photos. I had to send a fumigation crew through there 3 separate times just to get everything out. And this is one of the first properties I purchased. It's not sexy, it's not glamorous, but there's a lot of potential to create value. So the first thing that I did was go about creating physical value. While I was still under contract for the purchase of the property, I went to the city and worked to settle the city liens. The way I did that was I brought photos from my previous couple properties, I brought my track record with me, and I explained to them, this is what I do. I can show you 1, 2, 3 where I've done it before, this is what I'm going to do here, but I need your help to be able to make it happen. And the reason why you want to do this during due diligence is because after you've closed on the property, if the city doesn't want to work with you, then you're out of luck. You have a big, big problem on your hands. Evicted the vagrants, fumigated the property, and then invested $18,000 to renovate the units inside and out. New kitchen, new floors, all the basics to make it just really nice and livable for people. After creating the physical value, that led to creating the financial value. 61 grand to pick up the property, 18 to renovate, some more money for the liens. So all in, I was at 83. This was a deal that I'd done with Ocean Bank, so I purchased the property and renovated it all cash. After a year, the bank was able to appraise it based on just brand new value. Come out, look at it, not what you paid for it, not what you put into it, but what it's worth on the street today. They came in, appraised it, and they were willing to lend on $70,000, so that was the cash back that I got in my pocket. One of the important things with this, I spoke to a little bit earlier, and will continue to speak to, but when I started this, I started with very little money of my own, hardly anything, and the money that I still use today to buy the properties is the same exact money I used on the first properties. It's just continuing to recycle the same money over and over again. Cash back was 70 grand, so now the property is valued at 180 grand. Cash flowing pretty well, and my cash in the deal is 13,000 that I'm getting my return on, so a very strong return.
What percentage of the appraised value did they lend you?
70%. So, yeah, which is what I found to be pretty typical with the commercial mortgages, and there'll be some banks that'll go above that, but I don't want to over leverage, because I know the market can shift. This is another case study utilizing seller financing. This is a 5-unit apartment building located in Fort Lauderdale. It had a number of challenges. It had been at market for a very long time. I picked this up about 2 or 3 years ago. There was a cloud on the title. The roof was overhanging onto an adjacent property. If you know anything about title work or closing, you know that you really can't close with a cloud on the title. You won't be able to get title insurance, and the bank won't finance it. Very tough neighborhood. Only one of the 5 units was rented out, $500 a month. A single mother, a bunch of children running around, and she was dealing drugs out of the unit, which, you know, I'm not judging, but it brought a lot of people to the site, a lot of in and out, and it made it challenging. Like I said, no bank financing. I didn't have cash to buy it, and the seller wanted cash only. You know, why not? But I saw the potential to create value. There was a low per unit price. Units were in decent condition. They hadn't been all ripped out like the duplex in Hollywood. Duplex in Hollywood, all the plumbing was ripped out, all the electrical, copper wire, appliances, everything. This was in decent condition. Decent's a relative term. The one tenant, as much trouble as she was into, she was kind of keeping an eye on the property in the sense that people weren't going to come to the property and mess around where she was living. She had clout in the neighborhood, so nothing was happening while I wasn't there, which was good, at least during the initial closing period. And I knew the potential gross rents were there. If you get all 5 units renovated and rented out, then you're making some good cash flow. But the big obstacle was the seller. So the first thing I did after I inspected the property myself and the whole thing, I invited the seller to meet me at the property. And the seller was an interesting character. He was older gentleman. And when he arrived at the property and I started talking with him and asking him questions, you could tell that he was scared to be in the neighborhood. He was, looking over his shoulder. I'm not sure what he thought was going to happen, but you could tell he wasn't visiting the site, he wasn't collecting the rent, he wasn't checking on things. This was a headache that he wanted to get out of. So the first thing I did with him was I made sure to spend a lot of time at the property with him. If he's this nervous and it's this much of a headache for him, I made him walk me through the neighbors' yards, I made him introduce me to the tenant who was dealing drugs, I made him walk me down to the corner store for a pack of cigarettes, and I don't even smoke, just so he could, people hanging out, give him the full experience, show him, what I'm taking on for him, the favor that I'm doing him. These are some of the pictures of the place. I don't know why somebody would paint the ceiling and the walls green, but it was a designer's choice. So after we spent all that time on the property, I went back to the seller and I'd asked him if he would finance it for me. It's a lot easier to do this when a seller wants to get rid of the property, when they're not cash flowing, and when it's something that they're scared to be at. We arranged seller financing for $100,000 of the $150,000 sales price at 6% for 1 year. So the property cost me $156,000. During that year, renovated the property, leased it up, and then cured the title defect. There was a roof overhang onto the adjacent property. There was a couple $1,000 fix, but it allowed you to get a real mortgage on the property. And then at 1 year, 1 day, Ocean Bank again came through and gave me a mortgage for $130,000. So $100,000 paid off the seller, $30,000 back of my $50,000 that I put out. And the whole year that I was renovating, I was collecting rent, I leased it up, the whole thing anyway, so it was actually a little bit better returns. And after the bank came through with the financing and the property was cash flowing, it was a very solid return. This was a property I ended up selling almost everything I hold on to, but I felt like this property came as far as it was going to come. One of the fun things about this one was that on this deal, I acted as my own agent, and I hang my license with a broker. If I bring in third-party deals, he gets his 20% or whatever his cut is of it. If I negotiate with my own deals, I get to keep 100% of my commission. So the seller on this paid a 3% commission on $150,000, so it's $4,500. And then I gave that money back to him for the interest on the 1 year. So the 1 year seller financing ended up costing $1,500 at a point and a half, as opposed to $6,000. So if you don't currently have a real estate license, I'd recommend it, if nothing else, for opportunities like this. And this was the finished product. This is a third and final case study. When I first started acquiring sites, I picked up 3 condos, one after the next after the next. And the neighborhoods were more transitional. They weren't rough like the last one. Most of these were Lauderhill, open parks, and portions of them there. So they were solid, solid communities. But I needed to get my cash back out. And this was not too long after the market crash, and even to this day, it's very hard to get residential mortgages on condos that are investment properties. And a lot of banks won't lend on stuff that's, less than $100,000 or less than $150,000 or whatever their minimum is. So what I did with these, and I need to take this cash out for other acquisitions. This is the same, you'll see the same kind of figures, the $70,000 for the duplex, the $50,000 for the 5-plex, $75,000 here. It's all in the same range. It's just being used over and over and over again. But there was potential to use the existing value. All the units were rented out. They were all occupied. So what I did on this one was a line of credit refinance with the bank. They were able to issue a line of credit on all 3 units for $75,000. 5% interest. The line of credit won't change for 5 years, and then they'll flow based on LIBOR. So probably won't see much fluctuation, at least for the next couple of years. Took about 3 weeks to complete the paperwork, and it was under the name of the LLC, instead of being under my personal name. So you had asked a question about, residential mortgages at being tough and so forth. So this is a way to sometimes get around doing a residential mortgage just on the value of the properties. If you do a line of credit, commercial line of credit instead, you can a lot of times get the same value out, same 70% out. Very similar interest rate for a lot of my small apartment mortgages. I'm at 5 or 5.25, so very similar interest rate and very similar terms and quicker. Residential mortgages on investment properties, especially once you go past 4 or 5, can take a very, very long time to do. This is relatively quick.
Is that 4 or 5 per bank, or just 4 or 5 that you own, period?
So the limit's 4, period,
Okay.
and that includes your personal residence. So once you go above that, there's a group of direct lenders that function very similar to banks, and the direct lenders have huge portfolios. But there's so if the pool of banks that will write you a mortgage on your primary residence is this big, the pool of direct lenders that'll go up to 10 units is this big, and then there's a pool of direct lenders that'll go up to like 15 or 20 units. But once you get past 4 properties, you gotta go with a direct lender. They limit you. I don't like it either. But yeah. But this is a way around that too, because these didn't count against my 4 property limit, because these were under my LLC. Yeah, same thing with the duplex, the triplex, the fiveplexes. If those are under LLCs, they don't count against your personal property limit.
And you just have to build the credit of the LLC to a level that the bank will lend to you, kind of?
Sort of. So typically, they really don't care about that. What happens with a lot of, like Equity One, so Equity One has 150 shopping centers, and each shopping center is its own LLC. They have 150 LLCs. And you wind up doing the same thing when you have apartment buildings. And the banks will run your personal financial history, and they'll run your personal credit. But because it's a commercial loan, they just want to see really the cash flow. Do you have the rents to support the mortgage that you're getting, or support the line of credit that you're getting? So they care a lot more about that.
And won't ask for a personal guarantee, even though they're not really like researching the credit of the entity?
Yeah, so they'll probably still ask for a personal guarantee.
Okay.
So even though it's under the LLC, you'll still personally guarantee it. But that personal guarantee is only on the paperwork that you do with that bank. So if Ocean Bank is doing, your line of credit and your personal guaranteeing that stuff that's under your LLC, but you have your home mortgage with Wells Fargo's never gonna come across that personal guarantee that you have on your line of credit or your commercial stuff.
And then Chris, why don't do just all in one LLC, so when you do taxes, you can, some expenses will, kind of equal to the cash flow, so you don't have to pay more tax on income.
So the way it works, and I mean, if you're gonna do it, definitely consult with an attorney and so forth, but, so the way it works for me is separate LLCs for the properties, because you wanna limit your liability. Even though you have insurance, if somebody or something bad happens at one site, you don't want them to be able to come after all your other sites, and you don't want them to be able to come after you personally. So you set the LLCs, but when I do my taxes, all those LLCs are owned by Chris Murphy LLC, which comes from the personal returns. So it does flow through one place, just like Equity One. Equity One has Shopping Center 1 LLC, Shopping Center 2, and so forth, but they all flow up into one corporation. Yeah, it's the same type of deal. This was a Sheryl Sandberg quote, and I like this with funding sources, because what winds up happening is what we're talking about, in that you have to go through a lot of rejection and get really creative and find different ways to do it when you are funding your first deal, your first 2 deals. Real estate financing is really subjective. The bank may not see the value in the property that you see in there. Your investors may not see the value in the property, especially when you're first starting out. So I'm going to walk you through a couple of alternative funding sources that I used for my first few deals that are outside the traditional banks. And again, I'm not a financial advisor, these are just things that I personally have done. I broke these up into 3 categories. The first category is kind of the least formal, and it starts where you would expect it to start with, friends and family. I think the key to friends and family is to start early. It's not, hey, dad or mom or uncle or whoever, I just picked up property and I want to do this. It's communicating, months and years in advance with the people in your inner circle about what it is that you're doing, what your strategy is, how it's different, how you're building a track record. You set up your company, you set up your website, all the things that we've talked about previously. Get the people closest to you to know what you're doing. I'd approach it as a regular bank loan. You pay interest, you have loan documents drawn up. It can be done simply and easily enough with an attorney. But make it and keep it as formal as possible for the relationship and for yourself, to protect yourself. Obviously have a plan for repayment. If you know you're putting money into a property that you need to get back to be able to pay them back, make sure that you can get your money back. And make obviously all your payments on time. The Friends with Equity is a little bit more of a creative one as a take on friends and family. So Friends with Equity, I had a buddy of mine that I grew up with, and he lived up in Boston, and his wife's grandmother passed away and he inherited a house, and he had a line of credit on the house at 2.5%, and he had $80,000 or $100,000. But he was working every day, he wasn't investing with it himself. I borrowed the money for him, I paid him 8%, he's paying the bank 2.5%, so he's making his profit. And as you saw from the earlier returns, I'm making my returns on that money. So it worked out well for everybody. So equity in your own house is good, Friends with Equity is good as well. Same rules apply as the family and friends above, make sure it's written up. If you're gonna give them a piece of the profits of the deal, make sure that's incorporated, whatever the terms are, make it as specific as possible. And then the third one, for me, has just been a no-brainer. If you have a 401k, you can borrow half the value of it at 2.5%, 3%. It's risky because your money's not still in the 401k and it's not growing and so forth. But if you're growing it faster in your properties, then it's a solid investment. This has allowed me to retain full control of deals where maybe otherwise I would have had to give up a percentage to a partner. You're working with your own money, you're paying yourself back. It's cheap money, and you get to control everything. I think the risk here is that if you lose your job and you still have the money out, you have to pay a penalty on it to the IRS. But even at that, the penalty to the IRS is 10%, and then a little bit extra. So if you're pulling in high enough returns, maybe it's worth it to you.
I thought there was some rule that on a 401, there had to be some extenuating circumstance to pull money out.
So
Or
some 401ks have that, a lot don't.
It's
Yeah.
like 50%, you can borrow, if you're gonna do like for your own property, you can borrow like 50%, and, or, up to 50% of whatever you have.
Now, I think that you can avoid the 10% penalty with the IRS if there are extenuating circumstances, but for borrowing it, I've never needed to give an explanation of why I was borrowing it.
If you do it for a property for you, it's like 2.5 or something like that. If you do it for something else, I think it's a little higher. And if you do it for like your home, and you put it for your house, I think it's like 15 years.
so they do question somewhat what you do with the money.
Yeah, depending on what you do with the money.
I guess it probably depends on the employer, probably the provider. I've never had to, no one's ever asked, I've never had to state anything. Category 2, this is slightly more formal, but not all the way formal. I've had some good experiences with private lenders. Discover the same credit card people, they have a personal line of credit that you can use. It's at a fairly high interest rate, but it's pretty quick. You can get it done in 3 to 4 weeks, and it's a good source of initial capital, allows you to keep all the equity in your deal. The only thing I would say though is because it's only a 5 to 6 year term, the payments are high. So you'll wanna make sure that you can pay it back probably sooner than 5 to 6 years. Discover's invitation only, they, market to a certain demographic, household income, that type of thing. But the way around it is that if you call them a few months in advance before you think you might need it, you start asking questions about it, they'll spend 5 to 10 minutes on the phone with you, asking you different questions and so forth. And that won't get you an immediate invitation, but a couple months down the road, something will show up. So there's a way around it, because that is invitation only, or at least it had been. Peer-to-peer lending, and there's a lot more of these sites these days, which means that rates have come down. So, very similar to private lenders, you can borrow Lending Club up to 35 grand, but I think now Lending Club even does up to like 100 grand. And the interest rates on your first loan, I think you're still at 8 to 12% if you have reasonable credit and so forth. But on a second loan with them, it's even lower. And you can get more, so it actually, it's kind of a way of building your credit with just that one specific entity. And then acquisition commissions, the same way that I did on the Fiveplex in Fort Lauderdale. I mean, if you don't have a real estate license, I would get it immediately. I think the course is a couple $100 and it takes a week and you pass the state exam and so forth, but just to be able to get your commission back on your primary residence that you buy, well worth it, pays for it in spades. If you can use it on your own properties, even better. It allows you to register with a broker, so you can look on the MLS yourself. You can do all these things yourself that you couldn't if you were relying on another agent. For every property I've purchased, I've probably called around 50 properties at 6 a.m. at 11 o'clock at night. No real estate agent would ever want to do that with me. Nobody would want to go to these neighborhoods at those times. Nobody would want to climb through, the filth you saw in Hollywood. So having your own license allows you to get the lockbox codes, allows you to do these things, allows you to communicate with the banks directly, handle it yourself. And you don't want to be waiting on some other agent who you may not be their biggest priority because you're buying cheaper stuff and you require a lot of work to just be sending you stuff. If you have your license, you go find it yourself.
Have you ever ran into any problems during negotiations just because you were a realtor?
No.
Negotiating prices?
No, nobody's ever really questioned it. I have a good relationship with my broker. If I need to have him make the offer for a specific property, if I thought there was going to be an issue, he'd submit on my behalf. But no, nobody's ever questioned it. Even when I bought my primary residence, it was just, they're paying an agent anyway, so might as well be me.
You mentioned you drive by a lot of your properties when you're looking to acquire. Is there a particular time of day? Say, it sounds like a lot of your stuff is in rougher areas or whatever. Is there a particular time of day that you go by to see what it's like at its worst? I mean, you go by Friday after payday at
So,
8 o'clock when everybody's,
Again, it'd be like trade secrets, but I think that, so first of the month is usually, especially the first of the month falls on a, Friday night, Saturday night, can get a little bit rowdy. I mean, I go through the property all hours, all days. I've been to them at any time. But if I've got my son in the car with me, there's definitely times when I would avoid some of the neighborhoods. But no, I go always. Most of my tenants mail in their payments to my P.O. box. But if someone's behind me, I gotta go knock on the doors. Then, rain or shine, day or night, whenever you think they'll be home. That's what I do. All right, category 3. These are a little bit more traditional. We talked about in one of the case studies prior acquisitions. Typically, if you finance a property with a bank, with a traditional bank, they'll finance it for 70% of what you're buying it for. If they do that financing when you close on it. If you wait a year with most commercial banks, once you get past that 365 days, they'll do a fresh appraisal on it, so they'll finance it with nothing, not based on how much you paid for it. So if you paid 50 grand for it in cash and you wait a year and a day, and the bank comes out and says it's worth 200 grand, they'll give you the 70% on the 200 grand. It's typically the way it works. So a lot of times what I've done is, even if I need to get immediate financing, I'll re-review the financing after a year and a day. If I paid cash for a property, I don't refinance it at 9 months once the renovation's complete and it's leased up. I wait that extra 3 months to get myself past the 1 year period. Seller financing is something that we've talked about. I find it's best when it's short term. A lot of sellers won't finance for 20 years, 15 years, whatever. But what I would typically do is go for a year or 18 months, or do a year but have the option for a little bit extra time if you need it. That way it buys you enough time to renovate the property, rent it out, and get your traditional mortgage. So this is just a bridge to the traditional mortgage. Sometimes slightly higher interest rate. My guy in the Fiveplex did it at 6%, so really not so bad. I almost sort of kept that. And I offered to pay the 6% upfront at closing, just to make it easier for him while sending payments every month and to help him keep the rate lower. It's negotiable. You want your attorney to draft the documents, fast and efficient. Ideal for sellers that really want to sell, and I think a lot of that has to do with really feeling out the sellers. And it gives you an opportunity to find out what else they own. If he has one Fiveplex that he feels uncomfortable with, probably his others. If he finances one, then you know he'll finance a second. If he does want 6% for a year, then you know he'll do the second one at 6%, for at least some period of time. Best and fastest way, and if they own stuff in the neighborhood that you really like, then he probably owns other stuff in the neighborhood that you like. So really the best way to lead from one deal to the next. So in conclusion, we talked about getting started, some of the initial steps, developing your network, developing your concept, and then staying focused on building your track record. We walked through a couple of deal examples, and the deal examples all about creating value and using the resources that you have. We talked about the duplex with 400,000 worth of liens. We talked about the Fiveplex with self-financing, and then the line of credit refinance on the 3 condos. And then we talked about funding sources. The funding sources, making sure you get your cash out to reuse it, and being creative. And that's it.
Have you ever leased with the option to buy to the tenant, or lease with the option to sell?
I haven't sold very much.
Okay.
Most of my stuff is sold for long term.
Okay.
But I would if the circumstances were right.
What about, have you ever acquired any properties close to a school town when you divided the rooms and then different people get into
Say that again?
subleases? Basically, you, in a school town, you get an apartment or a few condos, and then instead of just renting to one tenant, you rent to a few students within the unit. So it's how
Oh.
you
Yeah, not in any of my neighborhoods.
No.
No, I'm not near any universities. But yeah, I mean, I guess you could.
I'd love to see.
No, yeah, not in that.
How do you find your deals?
So in the beginning, it was a lot of time on MLS. Now I do still rely on MLS, but once you've done a few deals under your belt, then a lot of people who operate in the neighborhoods get to know you. So a lot of times now people will call me up with deals that they have. Once you start working with a few banks, the same representative for, like if you buy foreclosed property, the same representative who has that property for Wells Fargo has everything else with Wells Fargo in that area. So it winds up being a quick phone call. Hey, I just purchased this from you. We made a quick transaction. That was so easy. That was the easiest buy you ever had. What else do you have coming up? So I think a lot of this is now kind of based on relationships, yeah. And same thing, sellers, I mean, a lot of times the sellers, if you're buying from a private individual and not a bank, if the sellers have apartment buildings in this neighborhood, they probably have others. So a lot of times just checking with them, hey, just bought this from you, it was a smooth transaction, what else do you have? And I check in every couple months.
Do you focus on a particular neighborhood, or do you go where the deals are at?
So I like certain neighborhoods. Most of my stuff is by 95 and Sunrise Boulevard, just east of 95 and just north and just south of Sunrise Boulevard. So we're by Sistrum, Sunrise, pretty close to downtown.
And the reason that you like that area is, I mean, I guess what's your niche? You know,
Seems like you have a particular focus, right?
Yeah, I love that neighborhood. What I love, what I like, I love it a lot. What I like about that neighborhood is, so I picked up 6 houses in there in the past 9 months, some stuff, before then too. But I like that because it's still a lower income neighborhood, but it's so close to downtown Fort Lauderdale. I mean, you're driving through the streets of my neighborhood and you can see, the buildings from downtown. Just east of my neighborhood, you got, Bayview, you got some really ritzy neighborhoods. I'm buying my houses now for, 90 grand, and their house a mile and a half away is 600 grand, 700 grand. So I like it. It may not turn over in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, but at some point in the future, the city's gonna keep expanding outward. And yeah, that's why I love that neighborhood, so I try to buy as much in there as I can. Some of the first properties, like, Hollywood's a little, down south, but east of 95 still. Stuff in Lauderdale Open Park was some of the first stuff, but everything after that first year, year and a half has all been right in that neighborhood.
Is it predominantly single-family homes, or is it a mix of triplexes and fourplexes?
It's a mix, So when you go over, so 4 units and under is considered residential, 5 and up is commercial, so it impacts the type of mortgage that you can get, type of insurance you can get, that type of thing. But I have on both sides of that line, but a lot of times if you go 5 and up, you'll get cheaper per unit rates on the insurance, property taxes are a little cheaper on a per unit rate. So if you're right on the fence between 4 and 5, it's better to go with the 5, from my experience.
As far as the profit margin, do you see better when you get the bigger, 4s or 5s versus just a single family unit that you might have purchased inexpensive?
Yeah, so not necessarily, not like you think you would. So I've picked up, I think, 27 properties over the past couple of years, and you see people who have big portfolios, 100 properties, 125 properties, and that's 100 headaches, 125 headaches. If you can get a right-sized portfolio of stuff that is cash flowing the way you want, and cash flowing enough, a lot of times that's better than having more units that are only cash flowing a little bit per unit. In the fiveplex that I gave the example of, some of the units in there were, $700 a month, $750 a month. A lot of the newer single families I have are, $1,350, $1,400 a month in rent. So it takes the same amount of work whether you're cashing the check for the $1,400 or the $750, but you have to cash twice as many. So I find that there's a right size to it, and it's not always the biggest. At least in the range that I'm working. Maybe it's different if you're buying a 100 unit community or such, but in the range I'm working, bigger's not always better.
You mentioned that when you started, you made, a lot of mistakes. Like, would you mind sharing some of the things that maybe will help us, like some of the mistakes that you made will cost you maybe more than others?
Sure, no, very good question. So I had picked up a 5-unit apartment building up in West Palm Beach. So immediately, you can probably spot a couple things that are wrong with it. One, way out of my geographic range, outside of the neighborhood that I know best. I'm not able to be there every day. But the reason why I picked up the property was it had a low per unit cost, and the rents were low. So I thought, well, these rents are much lower than what I'm getting in Fort Lauderdale, so there'll be opportunity to raise the rents. It came with a little piece of land next to it, so I said, all right, well, I can build something on the piece of land. So I know why I went into it, but the reason why it ended up being, and I still learned a lot, it was one of my first large commercial deals, so I learned a lot. I wouldn't not do it, but the big lesson I learned is, one, you gotta be really close to what you buy to be able to keep an eye on it all the time. You can't pay somebody else to take care of it the way that you would. And the second thing, which is also important, is that in that neighborhood, I thought that because the rents were lower than where it was in Fort Lauderdale, that there'd be room to raise them. That's not always the case, right? That was a bad assumption. The rents in that neighborhood were as high as they were possibly gonna go. So with that being the case, the per unit price I paid for each unit should have been lower. So if you overpay for something,
And never gonna make it.
Yeah, that's the word, there's nothing you can do after that, you can try to recoup it, I ended up making a profit on the deal, but it wasn't enough for the time I put in. But if you pay too high going in, there's really little you can do after that, even if you think it's a good. I bought it, it was 175 grand, so it was only a little bit more than 150 grand when I bought it in Fort Lauderdale, but the rents were completely different, and it was too far away for me to handle. The one in Fort Lauderdale I was at every single day. I had my crew of Fort Lauderdale guys who were able to renovate it. The West Palm Beach, I was like pulling teeth to get my guys up there. I couldn't get up there without missing a couple hours of time with my family or my kids. Yeah, it just wasn't worth it. That's it. But there's been a lot more, but that's it. Yeah.
Can I ask a quick question, Chris? The first one is, as people get older, do you find some of your sellers are people who have owned a couple of properties and say, no, I don't want to do this anymore? Have you seen the characteristic of the seller? I was wondering, can you pinpoint some of those? That's the first question. And then the second one is, what can these people do? You know, I'm a professor here. What can they do while they're here to start to get a head start in there? I know having you coming here is valuable. There's no way you could put a value to somebody that's doing it. So those are the 2 points I wanted to make. What can they do? And the next one is, have you found any characteristics of the seller that we could kind of look for?
Yeah. So to hit your second question first, yeah, I think the key is really to get started now. If you wait for, when you have money, or when you have a different job, or after your kids are born, or this or that, all the things that in life we tend to put off things based on. If you wait till that, then there's never going to be a time. The thing that I would do is start, immediately. The things like setting up your LLC, looking at properties, running the financials. You can do that any time of day or night when you're not doing everything else that you're doing. I know you guys have a packed schedule of school and jobs and family, everything. I bought my first property when my wife was 8 months pregnant, and I had just started a new job that I'd been at for like 2 months, and didn't know where the economy was going. Sometimes the worst time is the best time, because you know when things improve personally, when things are going to improve business-wise. So I wouldn't wait. I would start doing the baby steps as soon as you get home tonight, if this is something that you're interested in. And the other point on that is that, if you go to work for a large company, and I work for a very large company, $4 billion company, publicly traded, the whole thing. A lot of times at big companies you don't have, and I have a great job, all of it, but you don't have control. When you have your own properties, you're happy with investments, you have control of what your future looks like, where you allocate your time, how you're going to allocate your time in the future. All of these things that are so beneficial. So even picking up 1 or 2 properties to learn from initially will really open the door. The first one is by far the hardest. For characteristics of the seller, a lot of the sellers that I deal with are certainly older than me. Some of them have been in the neighborhood for a great many years and don't have the stomach for it anymore. I don't see many young people, wandering around neighborhoods. So I think that there's an opportunity there as the old guard turns over for new people to come in with new ideas, new opportunities. A lot of the houses I buy are in terrible condition, and once I renovate them, they're some of the nicest housing that you have in any of these neighborhoods. And I think if more young people get in there and start doing that, then that'll change the face of the neighborhood. So I think there's just opportunity there. Does that address you too?
Yeah, that's when you hit them both. Thank you.
So do you have an exit strategy for your properties? Like, do you plan on putting them like in a portfolio loan, or what is you plan on?
No, I plan to hold them until I'm long gone, at least for a long period of time, until it doesn't make sense. At some point, probably in the next couple months, I'll be transitioning out of Equity One and focusing on the investing full time. So that's the immediate goal. But no, I don't plan to sell. I think the opportunity to, if you have a bunch of mortgages at 4 3/4%, if you can group them all and get them into something lower. I'm always looking for opportunities to lower my expenses, lower my cost of capital. And if there's an advantage to doing that, if I can group them all for insurance, I do do it. If I find a new bank that's hungry for the business, I'll do that in a heartbeat. So I'm always looking at ways to make it more efficient.
So, like, how many times in a year do you revisit those strategies? Like you were saying, looking into like the different banks, different insurance packages, and
Yeah.
all those things.
Usually when I run out of money. It's the long and short. So, I mean, I try not to over leverage anything. I try to keep the leverage small. But if I bought, I mean, one of the first houses I bought was for $45,000, and so I took out $30,000 mortgage from a credit union at like 3%. So now the same neighborhood is easily $100,000. So if I can take out another $30,000 from there at that same, 3%, then that's a good way to keep recycling. Yeah. But typically, like on the commercial stuff, the duplex, the fiveplex, I really won't touch it. That stuff I'd like for it to, I want for it to get paid off at some point. I think 20 years from now, if that stuff is free of debt, depending on how expensive debt is, that might be a good place to be.
I think another thing to sort of point out with this is you've got to know yourself, and you've got to know what you actually want to spend your time doing and what you don't want to spend your time doing, and as it relates to kind of this, buying, renovating, managing, and, whether you do hold or you do sell. I mean, speaking for myself personally, I learned very quickly, I hated the property management aspect, okay? Because I hated dealing with people.
Yeah.
I love the renovation piece. I love the acquisition side of things. I love the disposition aspect. But I absolutely fundamentally hated the property management aspect. The day-to-day routine, getting called in the middle of the night when my toilet blows up or the roof is leaking or, whatever, and dealing with that sort of stuff. And, and I think that's a really important thing to, you've got to really know what it is that you're good at and what you actually enjoy and which aspects of it that, you really need to find somebody else to sort of, deal with. And how much of it, you can, the tolerance for what's going to keep you awake at night.
Yeah.
So.
No, I think it goes back to finding the niche, finding what you're passionate about, what you like doing. When I say that I love that neighborhood, I do love that neighborhood. I love being in there. I love looking at houses there. I know everything on every single street in there, all of it. And it makes it a whole lot easier to go there at 6 o'clock on a Saturday morning, leave my wife and kids asleep, and go crawl around vacant houses. You've got to love the parts of the business. That fiveplex that I sold, it was, I would get calls from there. And one guy, wife would call me 8 o'clock at night, chasing her husband with a knife. He's off his medicine, or this one's dealing drugs again, or this one. I had one tenant who was working, and again, I mean, no, this is judgmental. It makes no difference to me. I had a tenant who was, working at a club, and so she paid her rent. I mean, a stack. I mean, have you ever seen $800 of $1 bills? It's like a rap video or something like that. And I had to get home, and my wife's like, "What's this?" And I had to put it in plastic bags and so forth. I don't want all the germs all over my dining table. And then I got to bring this stack of $1 bills to my bank. And try to slide it under the window. So yeah, I mean, it goes back to how big a portfolio do you want, the value in it. It goes to loving what you're doing and outsourcing the parts that you don't love, and having the right properties.
Actually brings me to my last question. It sounds to me like you're doing a lot of the management of properties yourself. I mean, how do you juggle that with your full-time job? I mean, how labor intensive is it, or what sort of team do you have behind you? I mean,
Yeah. I think there's tricks to it. I cell phone for the business and a cell phone for the other job. I have 2 laptops in my office. I have 2 sets of printers at my office. You name it. So I keep them separate, but I make sure that I can put in the time I need to each of them. I get to my office in the morning by 6:30, 7 a.m. so I can punch out an hour and a half of my business stuff before I begin Equity Wednesday. So I think it's about finding the balance, but I think it can.
but are you the one actually going out there and like fixing the toilet or?
No, I'm not handy like that. I have a crew of guys who do the repairs. I have a guy that helps me with the leasing of the properties because I don't have time to be showing them. I'd rather pay the half month of rent, his commission, to show them when I'm ready to lease them. the crew of guys I used to renovate them, I've used over and over at these properties, so I trust them, they know what I want, I know what they want. But I handle all the management myself, all the acquisition myself. I try to handle all the important stuff just myself, just because at least I'll know it's getting done the way I want it to.
So you decided to go with a personal group versus some of these concierge management services that are going around? That's like $250 a month or?
Yeah. You're talking on the repair side?
Mhm.
Yeah, I like to have my own crew. I think it all comes down to having the right people. I think, my main guy can do a little bit of electric, a little bit of plumbing, and a whole lot of everything else. It's easy enough to find painters and floor guys and so forth, but I think if you can get one or two folks that really know what they're doing in a whole lot of circumstances, you'll save yourself a whole lot of money. If I've got a leaking faucet, I send my maintenance guy who can fix it and it costs me $30 or something. If I gotta send a plumber, it's $150. And Jesus, if I wanna spend 2 hours of my time trying to figure out how to fix it myself, that's really not worth anything. So I think having the right people definitely helps a lot. And sometimes they can come from odd places, just like the properties get creative. One of my main maintenance guys who cuts the grass on the properties for me is deaf. I don't use sign language, so we do everything through text, we do everything through notes. He does a good job, but it's hard for him to find work, so he gives it to me at a good price. I give him more than he asked for, so he's really happy with me, and it's a good relationship, and you can always find that in neighborhoods.
Chris, I love the point that you say you have two set of computers, because people need to not put their private business on their corporate computers. Never do that. You're gonna get fired more easily. If they're looking to nitpick on you, that's the first place they'll start. Let me see what you're doing on this computer.
Yeah.
So if I were you, any of you wanna start working, spend the $500 and buy your own private little computer, and you could have it on the side there and you do your work.
Yeah, there's so many, tools these days that even just, 6 years ago, like, Dropbox on your phone.
Mhm.
So I have all my leases, all my everything right there on my phone. Genius Scan and some of these other apps, you can scan and send documents. That didn't exist, more than a handful of years ago. It's easy, once you set up your website, set up your own email address. Most of my tenants text. I invoice on the 20th of each month, so on the 1st, they send the payments to the lockbox, so I'm not collecting unless, it's a real problem, somebody's not paying, then you're, banging on doors, but yeah, you gotta keep it separate. Every large company, I know Equity wants Snoops.